tu? Hã? Bonjour.
just... That's it.
Oh, thank you.
Good morning. Mr. Commissioner, can we have the red button again, please?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, Advocate Libber.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner and members. We are ready to proceed. Before I call my next witness, I have placed an extract from the draft minutes of the board held on the 1st of February before the Commission. Mm-hmm. I wish to place on record that I had a consultation with the chairman of the board, the Deputy Finance Minister, Mr. Gugubele, this morning, and we have discussed this, and he has confirmed to me and asked me to convey to the Commission that what is stated in 5.7 in the extract from the minutes is indeed correct. It reads, the chairman, after having excused himself from the meeting to take a call from the Minister of Finance, reported that the Minister requested that the board should do the honourable thing and tender their resignation in order for the Minister to reinstitute the board, failing with the Minister would not have a choice but to follow his discretion. He agrees that is the correct question.
Well, do I understand you correctly that the Deputy Minister now says, yes, that is correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Thank you.
Mrs. Beswick is the next witness. She's ready to take the prescribed oath.
Morning, Ms. Beswick.
Morning.
Are those your full name, Sandra Beswick?
That's right, yes.
Right. Have you got any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
If not, then do you swear that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
So help me God?
So help me God. Yes, I do.
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mrs. Beswick, you have prepared a written statement for the Commission. It's been handed to the Commission. Can you start with paragraph 1 and just explain and tell the Commission more about your background?
I have a BCom honours degree, and I was a employee of Absa Bank for many years. I was an experienced banker until I left in 2009. I am now a senior business rescue practitioner, and I have my own business that I conduct the business rescue from. I will go to the statement now. I was appointed by the PIC as an alternate independent sector industry expert on 25th of September 2013 as a member of the Priority Sector and Small and Medium Enterprise Fund Investment Panel. Sounds like a real mouthful. In the unlisted investment segment. This panel merged with the Private Equity and Priority Sector FIP, and I continued to serve as an independent expert until my board appointment on the 1st of December 2015 by the Finance Minister, Mr. Nonhlanhla Nene.
Can I interrupt and apologize again? I forgot these things sometimes. Mrs. Beswick is represented by her attorney who's present here, Mr. Alex Elliott, if he can just place himself on record.
Mr. Elliott.
Thank you, Justice. My name is Alex Elliott from the firm Hogan Lovells, and I'm representing Ms. Beswick, the witness today.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please then continue?
My first 3-year term...
Sorry. I've got it in my mind because I've come across the firm Lovells. Is there another name? You said something, Lovells?
Hogan.
Hogan Lovells. H-O-G-A-N.
H-O?
G-A-N, Justice.
Hogan.
My first 3-year term terminated at the end of November 2018. However, it was extended for a further 6 months by the current Finance Minister, Mr. Tito Mboweni, in December. The PIC had 3 chairpersons during my tenure as a board member, namely Mr. Msibisi Jonas, Mr. Sifiso Buthelezi, and Mr. Mondli Gungubele in the capacities as Deputy Finance Ministers. I am currently a member of the following subcommittees of the board. I am the chairperson of the Information, Communications and Technology Governance Committee, the Audit and Risk Committee, the Human Resources Remuneration Committee, Director Affairs Committee, and the Private Equity Fund Investment Panel, as well as the Social and Economic Infrastructure Investment Panel. The period between the 1st of December 2015 to March 2017, under the chairperson of Mr. Jonas. During the tenure and leadership of Mr. Jonas, the board meetings were convened as scheduled at 9 a.m. and were conducted in a respectful and competent manner. Documents were published timeously to all board members, allowing board members sufficient time to review them before the scheduled meetings. Special board meetings were only convened when necessary, mainly to approve submissions to National Treasury in order to meet deadlines. The relationship between board members was affable and cordial, despite the occurrence of robust debates in reaching agreement of the matters at hand. As far as I am aware, there was no leakage of information during this period. The firing of Finance Minister Mr. Pravin Gordhan and Deputy Finance Minister Mr. Jonas at the end of March 2017 was a cause of great concern for me because the perceived risk of potential state capture of the PIC increased significantly.
Can you just briefly elaborate on that? Why do you say that?
Because it was perceived that with the history of Mr. Buthelezi and Mr. Gigaba, that there was potential for the PIC, for state capture of the PIC. Also at the AGM, where Minister Gordhan was present as the shareholder representative, he warned us of state capture and asked us to be vigilant and diligent in our duties to protect the PIC.
Thank you. You can proceed.
The period between the 1st of April 2017 to February 2018, the chairperson was Mr. Sifiso Buthelezi. As I said, the appointment of Mr. Malusi Gigaba as Finance Minister and Mr. Sifiso Buthelezi as his deputy exacerbated my fears of state capture of the organization and the importance of maintaining my fiduciary duties.
Just a question, just a quick one. I just wanted to check. You say the minister warned you, Gordon. Was it in a meeting, or just explain a bit there, please?
It was at the AGM prior to their removal, and on a previous occasion also he warned us of state capture, and he did implore us to protect the PIC.
Can I, interrupt you? In your statement, you briefly deal with the appointment of Minister Gigaba and the suspension of board meetings. You were present when Dr. Manning testified. You heard her version. You're not dealing extensively with that. All I want to know, do you agree with what Dr. Manning testified about this meeting with Minister Gigaba and the board?
Yes, I do, 100%.
Thank you.
Can I continue? All board and committee meetings were suspended on the instructions of Mr. Gigaba until he had familiarized himself with the PIC. I consider this to be highly irregular from a governance perspective because a company cannot operate optimally without a functioning board. The first board meeting was convened after 3 months on the 28th of July 2017. The PIC at that time was in the media spotlight with continual speculation and allegations of mismanagement, tyrannical behavior and impropriety perpetrated by the CEO and CFO. It was also reported that the PIC was a target for state capture, which seemed plausible for the following reasons. Crisis management was the order of the day, which attributed to the unusual number of special board meetings being convened. The board was cited for lack of good governance and was accused of protecting the executives.
Who made those accusations?
It was mostly in the media, and as far as I can remember, it was mostly in the media. Emails disguised, also those emails that we received from the Mr. James Nogu's emails. Emails disguised as whistleblowing reports from a certain Mr. James Nogu were distributed to a wide-ranging list of stakeholders, which ignited further media and public attention. Highly confidential documents, including board papers, transaction reports, and correspondence, were leaked to the media and other external parties. Board meetings became highly contentious, and strong divisions of mistrust between board members became apparent. At the special board meeting of the 15th of September, the decision to commission an investigation by the head of internal audit instead of an internal investigator, as per the original decision, was taken when the board had satisfied itself that the documents presented of the approval of the MST transaction reflected that PIC process was duly followed.
Sorry to interrupt again. Can you just go a bit slower and give more detail about this? As I understand it, and from previous witnesses, there was an original decision to go for an external forensic investigation. That was later changed, is that correct?
That is correct. It was later changed.
Why? Why was it changed?
We were deliberating on the process to be followed, and at the time, Dr. Manning put up her hands and said that we are being played here. And we suddenly realized that there was an ulterior motive as to why we needed to do an external investigation into Dr. Majila. It appeared that they wanted him to be suspended so that an alternative CEO could be placed there. We also allowed the CEO and the CFO to provide their taking on the emails and to give their views, which is, we believed was the correct process to follow.
Can I, again, sorry to interrupt again, the evidence of Mr. Schlitzweier yesterday was that you had, before the meeting started, in your board pack, the written versions of the CEO and the CFO regarding these allegations, and they were then later called in to supplement or to explain what they've stated. Is that correct?
That is correct, but we also had the documents that of the approval process that was followed. They gave us a detailed explanation of the processes that were followed, and we deemed those processes to have been followed within the policies of the PIC. We also, before the start of the meeting and at the start of the meeting, were concerned and we questioned why a special board meeting was called when this was ostensibly a matter for the Directors' Affairs Committee.
Just a question in relation to that. At that point in time, were you aware of the airport meeting and the ministerial pressure being put on the CEO?
No, we weren't aware of that, and it didn't come out in the internal investigation. It only was reported in the Budlender report in last year.
Would you, with hindsight, if that had been revealed, felt that the processes were appropriate?
Yes, I do believe that, because we were looking at the PIC processes. Although the Budlender report did question why we didn't do that, and it would have come to light earlier. Perhaps it would have, perhaps it wouldn't have. And we don't know, he said we should have reported to the finance minister. We don't know if any action would have been taken from that. Okay. I think also the investigation, they wanted us to do an external investigation, which was based on basically emails from an unknown party that were unsubstantiated at that time.
Can you please proceed?
Okay. At the special board meeting of 15th of September, the decision to commission an investigation by the head of internal audit instead of an internal investigator as per the original decision was taken when the board had satisfied itself that the documents presented of the approval of the MST transaction reflected that the PIC processes were duly followed. The CEO and CFO were called to provide their explanation into the allegations which they deemed to be unfounded. The CEO denied he had any relationships with the woman mentioned in the mails, and the head of internal audit was given 2 weeks to report the findings to the board.
Can I again interrupt? Was there a split in the board about the CFO and the CEO having given the right of audience to state their case?
There was a split, but then they were allowed to give their view. There was also a split. Mrs. Zulu she abstained from signing the resolution because she did not believe that we should do an internal investigation. She wanted the external investigation to be conducted.
Thank you. Proceed.
Comprehensive details of this turbulent period have been widely covered in the evidence provided by Dr. Claudia Manning to the Commission. I will rather concentrate on the period after her departure in July 2018. I was constantly cognizant of my fiduciary duties and have felt obliged to try and protect the government pensioners and employees' assets, including those of the Unemployment Insurance Fund and the Compensation Commission, in the custody of the PIC.
I'm sorry to interrupt again, and I'm just worried that I'll forget it. You mentioned at the beginning of your evidence that you chair the Audit and Risk Committee. No,
I chaired the Information Technology Committee.
Not the Audit and Risk Committee. Must that be corrected?
Was it?
1.4.2.
No, it doesn't say chair.
Oh, you're the member. I'm sorry. Okay. That's my mistake. It was chaired by Tatasma Fube before she resigned.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Apologize.
The period from March, April 2018 to date, under the chairperson, Mr. Mondli Ngubele. Special board meetings became the norm and lasted a good couple of hours, becoming arduous and fragmented. They were scheduled at short notice, often commencing at unsociable hours. Documents were not always circulated timelessly, thereby not allowing board members sufficient time to review them.
Can you briefly just tell the Commission about the first meeting with Mr. Gungubela as the chair? What happened? Was it a pleasant, comfortable meeting?
It was a very uncomfortable meeting. The board was slated. He was reading from minutes of the 15th of September and the 29th of September, and he felt that the board hadn't done its duty correctly by not investigating the CEO through an external investigator. He castigated the board for not following the processes as he believed we should have done.
Thank you.
Special board meetings became the norm and lasted a good... Oh, I've said that, okay. At some of the meetings, it appeared that Mrs. Zulu was driving the proceedings, i.e. acting as de facto chairperson. Some members of the board were afforded time to state their case, while others were curtailed from voicing their opinions.
Can I again interrupt? According to the evidence of Mrs. Laswai yesterday, the split and unhappiness at board meetings was especially focused when there was a discussion regarding the CEO.
That's correct, yes. In March-April 2018, an onslaught of media and public attention on the PIC intensified, with renewed attacks on the integrity and alleged tyrannical management style of the CEO. Misinformation and leakage of confidential information, including board documents, abounded, which was probably propagated and exacerbated by disgruntled employees who had either been dismissed or suspended. The sources of the renewed media attacks were unclear. However, the campaign was mainly directed at discrediting Dr. Majila. These media attacks prompted the United Democratic Movement to launch a court application, addressed in paragraph 5. At the board meeting of 22nd of June 2018, to discuss the UDM court application, the chairperson spent an inordinate amount of time reading from the minutes of the board meetings of the 15th and 29th of September. He berated the board on the decision taken to, firstly, conduct an internal verification process on the MST matter, and secondly, to clear the CEO of any wrongdoing. He also expressed his concern that the board had allowed the CEO and CFO to state their case. It became evident that he was dissatisfied with the process that had been followed, and I felt he was trying to pressurize us. One of the members likened it to an ambush to reopen the matter and commission an external forensic investigation, despite the findings exonerating the CEO of wrongdoing relating to the pretty low investment application.
Question. There were leaks of documents to the UDM. Did you guys, manage to find out who leaked those documents to the political party, to that political party?
No, we didn't. We had suspicions, but we didn't know who it was.
Okay.
The majority of the board, including myself, disagreed with this recommendation because we were satisfied that we had properly considered the allegations. Our decision to conduct an internal process and the resultant outcome confirmed this decision. In a nutshell, the PIC's internal investment approval processes that had been followed correctly and the pretty low application had been rejected. The distrust among board members... Sorry.
Question again. I need to go back to the leaks to UDM. You said you suspected something. Can you maybe give us that? Because I've asked the judge, he says we can ask that question.
Okay.
Suspicions.
Sorry. There were allegations in the disciplinary proceedings of Mrs. Matabula that she had leaked information. We haven't received confirmation of that as yet. But the suspicion came in, and this is my view, is that the same lawyer that was acting for the UDM was acting for some of the suspended and dismissed employees.
Give us a name of the lawyer. Can you
Mr.
give
Brian, was it Mabuza, I think? Mr.
Mabuza
Eric
attorneys.
Mabuza, Eric Mabuza, yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
The distrust among board members, including the chairperson, resulted in further divisions, and meetings became disjointed and confrontational, especially on issues around Dr. Majila. The United Democratic Movement court application. The special board meeting of 22nd June 2018 was convened to discuss the urgent court application launched by the UDM to order the finance minister to suspend the CEO because of his alleged corrupt deeds, commission an external investigation of the MST transaction, and conduct an independent inquiry into the CEO's alleged corrupt behavior, prohibit the board from taking any decisions concerning the suspension of the CEO because there was a conflict of interest, having failed to suspend him in 2017. The respondents cited in the application were Dr. Majila, the PIC, which is the board, Minister of Finance, and the chairperson. 3 of the respondents filed an opposing notice, while the chairperson filed a notice to abide the UDM application after he had signed the board resolution to oppose the action.
Can I just again interrupt? According to the Deputy Minister, at the board meeting, he informed the board that he was not going along with the resolution. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. In his decision to abide the action, he set out his concerns. The decisions taken by the board in September and October 2017, contents of the statements issued by the board, that the board did not conduct an external investigation. The following statements are excerpts from his affidavit. The chairperson has recorded that, in his view, the board's decision to prioritize a forensic investigation regarding the leakages and not to conduct a forensic investigation regarding the allegations against the CEO could be seen to have been an attempt by the board to shield the CEO and the CFO to expose the whistleblower. The chairperson has also recorded that he raised his concerns with the board, and he cannot confidently state that the board acted properly when it dealt with these matters. He has also expressed the view that there is not much objectivity and independence amongst board members, and the board has relied on the views and advice of the CEO and compromised its duty of care. He has recorded that the board has continuously refused, neglected, and or failed to conduct an investigation in regard to the allegations levelled against the CEO, and this caused tension and created camps in the board. The chairperson has also indicated that the majority of the board refused to re-look at the issues, while the minority have constantly questioned the process adopted by the board. The decision by him to abide by the court application was a contradiction in terms, in my view, because he had signed the resolution of the board's decision to oppose the action in his capacity as chairman of the PIC. The chairperson was undermining his own board in public, which further fueled the divisions among board members and led to the resignation of Dr. Manning, which weakened the board significantly. Mrs. Tantazwa Fubu also resigned at this time, and that further led to weakening of the board. It was apparent that the chairperson did not have faith and trust in the board about the way the MST matter was handled, which continued unabated until the release of the findings contained in the Budlender report, which I describe in paragraph 6. The finance minister sent a letter dated the 14th of May 2018, wherein he raised concerns about the continued media reports, and in particular an article published in City Press dated 13th of May 2018. The board was required to provide feedback to him on these reports, whether disciplinary action was taken against the CEO and CFO, and the information requested by his predecessor, Minister Gigaba.
Question. The chairperson mentioned that there was a group, which sort of wanted to protect the CE, and from his side he wanted to sort of to suspend him, really. So was there a way in which the CEO has sort of held you to ransom, or he was, you were sort of protecting him, as a first question? The second question is that why was the chairperson really adamant on taking this action about, suspending the CEO? Those two questions, if you could give us some views there.
In terms of if I can just go to your last question first, he never held us to ransom at all. We always were allowed to have robust debates with him, and on a number of occasions I did take him to task about certain things that were happening at the PIC. He didn't hold me to ransom at all. He never, and we weren't pro Dr. Majila. It was pro process and for the good of the PIC. I'm not sure why the chairperson wanted to reopen the external investigations. But as I said earlier, in our debates and when we decided to do the internal investigation, the investigation was really based on a number of emails and media reports that we had received. And anybody could have sent those emails. We didn't know who the source of those emails were. And we did do some investigation, but as I said, it was based on hearsay, on emails, and not based on true evidence. Yeah. And the Budlender report. At an extraordinary annual general meeting convened on 25th of July 2018 with the Finance Minister, Mr. Nene, the following items were discussed. The board was requested to commission an external forensic investigation into the allegations made against the CEO and CFO, the apparent discord between some members of the board and the chairperson, divisions within the board and lack of trust between members, plan of action dealing with current issues to be submitted to him by 17th of August 2018. We were informed at that time that he was engaging with the President to institute a commission of inquiry into the activities of the PIC. The board agreed to commission the external investigation. Advocate Jeff Budlender, Senior Counsel, was appointed to lead the investigation. Advocate Budlender released his findings in a report on 30th of September, wherein the CEO was exonerated of wrongdoing in relation to the Pretty Low investment application. It agreed with the internal audit report of 2017. The report highlighted that the CEO had failed to disclose facts to the board about the pressure that was being applied on him by the previous cabinet minister, Mr. David Mashlobo, to assist the woman in question. The board was criticised for not conducting the internal investigation, which would have highlighted the cabinet.
Is it external?
The external investigation, which would have highlighted the cabinet minister's role earlier and which could have been reported to the finance minister. During the investigation, Advocate Budlender sent correspondence to the deputy chairperson, Dr. Kolani Makwanazi and Mrs. Dudu Schlatzweier, recommending that the disciplinary proceedings against the company secretary, Mrs. Bongani Matabula, be delayed until the report of his findings had been finalized. It is also of concern to me that this report was not placed in the public domain. Since this report was issued, the board has heeded the recommendation to record and minute all in-camera meetings.
Before you move to the next item, can you just briefly deal with the matter where it was common cause that the CEO contacted a person to assist Ms. Lowe financially. Can you briefly deal with that? What was the decision or the attitude of the board about that?
In the initial emails from Mr. James Nogu, mention was made that the CEO had applied pressure on Mr. Malawusi to assist Mrs. Lowe. We found out afterwards on the meeting on the 29th of September where the internal auditor contacted Mr. Malawusi and he spoke to the CEO to get their version of what had transpired. Mr. Malawusi confirmed that the CEO had contacted him to assist Mrs. Lowe. I'm not sure whether it was in a monetary way or to assist her with her business in introducing her to his network, and maybe there could be synergies between the business interests of Mr. Malawusi and her business. And it came out at the meeting on the 29th of September, the internal auditor reported that Mr. Malawusi had given Mrs. Lowe initial 150,000 rand and another 150,000 rand to stop the sheriff from evicting her from her premises. He said that the CEO did not apply pressure on him, but he did feel obliged because he was an investee from, he benefited from funds that were provided to his company from the PIC.
As an director.
Sorry.
In relation to that, and again with hindsight, would you not regard that as material non-disclosure and something of concern that this is an approach of a CEO to contact different people who have been funded by the PIC? Was this the only instance you were aware of? Did you ask the CEO if he did this on other occasions? Because it's not a proper thing to do. Even if you're not saying do it, the implication is there about needing to do it. And obviously with hindsight, it's a question of saying, would this have altered any of your views about the transaction? And then just to bring it up to date, given all of the noise around the MST deal, are you aware that it is not being serviced?
I'm not aware that the transaction is not being serviced. And I think to go back to the first point, if we had more evidence at the time about Mr. Malawusi and that he had helped Mrs. Lowe, we probably would have taken further action, disciplinary action against the CEO. The CEO issues. The relationship between some members of the board and the CEO was becoming tenuous. The continual negative publicity in the media led me to believe that there were internal and external forces intent on having him removed from his position as CEO. This breakdown in the relationship culminated in Dr. Magila addressing a letter to the chairperson informing him of his intention to tender his formal resignation in January 2019 and exit the PIC at the end of April 2019. An extract of the minutes from a meeting held on the 16th of November states, the chairman informed the board that the CEO had provided him with a letter of intention to resign. The chairman undertook to forward the CEO's letter to directors for consideration, and discussion was at the board meeting scheduled for the 23rd of November 2018. This was the first time the board as a whole was made aware of the letter from Dr. Magila. The letter attached is dated the 8th of November, not the 8th of September, it was my error, was only provided to the board on the 22nd of November 2018, despite the chairman, the finance minister, and the media having prior sight of it. Vital information was being withheld from the board, which means that our compliance with our fiduciary duties were compromised. The employees were also not informed timelessly and read about the letter in the media. A special income...
Sorry, can I interrupt? Did you ask the chairperson why this happened? Was it discussed? At
the meeting of the 23rd of November, I did express my concern that the board had not seen the letter, but I never received a response as to why we had not received the letter. A special in-camera meeting was convened on 23rd of November 2018, where once again the divisions among board members became evident on whether to accept the letter of intent as a resignation or to agree to the terms mentioned to allow him to exit the PIC at the end of April 2019. Mrs. Zulu was adamant that the letter constituted a letter of resignation on the following basis, which she read out in terms of case law. An extract from the minutes of the meeting reported what was read out of the meeting by Mrs. Zulu. The Labour Appeal Court and the Appellate Division, now the Supreme Court of Appeal, have held that when regarding the test for resignation, that an employee has to, by words of conduct, evince a clear and unambiguous intention not to go on with his contract of employment, and has to act in such a way as to lead a reasonable person to the conclusion that he did not intend to fulfill his part of the contract. The majority of board members agreed that the letter evinces his resignation and did not accept the terms and conditions he proposed, declaring that the breakdown in trust, as stated by him in the letter, was of concern and that they could not continue to work with him on that basis. Other members, including myself, expressed the view that in order to have a stable transitionary phase, he should be allowed to exit from the PIC in an orderly fashion at the end of April 2019. My legal advice at that time was that the letter did not constitute a letter of resignation.
Sorry to interrupt again. Did you, in fact, at that point in time, sought legal advice on this issue?
Yes, I did.
And the advice was?
That it was not a letter of resignation. We were also concerned that the acceptance of his resignation could be labelled as an unfair labour practice because it may not be compliant with HR processes and policies of the PIC and could lead to legal action being taken against the PIC.
Just a question. In terms of the advice which you said you sought, was that yours or board advice? I mean, was it a personal advice that you got?
It was personal advice on a sort of informal basis.
Yes, but it was not put to the board in order.
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, the majority of the board accepted his resignation with immediate effect and required him to vacate his office by Monday the following week. The letter to Dr. Majila accepting his resignation was drafted by Mrs. Zulu during the meeting. The chairperson briefed Dr. Majila of the resolution adopted by the board and handed him the letter accepting his resignation. The minutes reflected the following response from the CEO. He expressed the view that he did not submit a resignation letter, but a letter of his intention to resign effective the 30th of April 2019. He did not view the decision of the board as an amicable separation and sees the decision as a breach of his employment contract. He therefore does not accept the board's resolution. He was not allowed to continue to address the board and was dismissed from the meeting after having received the letter. I felt that there was a contradiction.
Sorry, can I just ask, just for emphasis or clarity, so in essence, HR and legal advice from your own the PIC's legal team and the head of HR were not involved in drafting that letter?
No, they were not.
It was done by the board or a board member?
Done by a board member. She did circulate it to us for our comments.
But it was not with the head of HR looking at process and saying, this is what we need to do, this is what we want to do. The HR was not involved at all?
No, they weren't involved at all.
If I can just go a little bit back. You mentioned that you had sought legal advice with regard to whether or not the decision that the CEO had resigned was correct. Am I right?
Sorry.
Did you mention to board members that I have taken legal advice And my advice is that this is not in accordance with the law.
No, I didn't. I felt that there was a contradiction in saying that he must be treated with dignity and honourably at the meeting. However, the manner in which he was notified of the board's decision did not reflect that sentiment. The decision to appoint Mrs. Moray in the role of acting CEO was a majority decision, which was in fact the chairman voted in favour of that because the board was split. I was one of the directors that did not agree with the decision because she had been implicated in some of the James Nogu emails. A task team was appointed to obtain legal guidance to ensure that Dr. Majila was compensated fairly in respect of his remuneration, bonus and benefits.
Sorry, was that legal advice obtained?
The legal advice was obtained, yes. We did receive at a meeting after a long meeting at Scopa that was communicated to us.
A question. There was a to and fro about Dr. Majila. People say he needs to leave. Some say we need to keep him. But there was a lot of media, attention on transactions and across the board. The people who were supporting him, so to say, didn't they look at that and say, there are so many things which show that this company could have problems, could be having problems. And didn't you think that, the doctor was accountable for that?
Until it was proven that he had done, that he was involved in these transactions, I think we couldn't hold him accountable. It was also media speculation. The board did do some investigations into some of the transactions, and which are being done now by the Commission of Inquiry. Perhaps it wasn't really to save the person, it was for the institution so that the transitionary phase could take place in an orderly way. I felt that it would be destabilizing for the organization if we let him go immediately. Okay.
I think the point that's being raised is, in your experience, was there any sign that some members of the board tried to protect Dr. Majila at all costs?
No, there was no sign of that at all. It was more to protect the institution rather than the individual himself. The meeting of 21st of January 2019, which lasted from 4 p.m. till 2 a.m., there were two items on the agenda: the AO Technology Interim Report, which was prepared by Internal Audit, and an update on employee relations were the main items on the agenda that were discussed at the meeting. The AO Technology Interim Report. The head of internal audit was commissioned by the chairperson after the Scopa meeting in December to perform a review of the processes followed into the investment in AO Technology Solutions Limited by the chairperson of the PIC board. The 94-page report entitled Draft Report on Preliminary Review of Processes Followed when Investing into the AO Technology Solutions Transaction in 2017 was only circulated to the board members at the meeting on the 21st of January 2019, after we had insisted that the head of internal audit make copies for us. He went out of the meeting to make the copies and returned later with copies.
Just to get that clear, the evidence before the Commission was that initially they walked in, the chairperson and the internal auditor, with one copy.
The internal auditor had one copy and the chairperson had his copy.
And board members then insisted to have copies?
Yes, we did, because we couldn't make a decision based on not having read the report. We couldn't apply our minds, even though we had only received it that night. The chairperson said his reason for not allowing the report to be seen prior to the meeting was because board members could not be trusted not to leak it. He remained adamant that the board was not unduly compromised, despite the requirement to reach a decision at the meeting. A scan of the document revealed a number of errors of incorrect dates, the sequence of events were not in chronological order, and contradictions. It was evident that the report was compiled hurriedly and was not reviewed for errors before it was given to the board. The summarized key findings were presented by the Head of Internal Audit, Mr. Lufuna Nemagovani. The preliminary findings of the report indicated that the transaction team had flouted PIC internal investment transaction processes. The overall sentiment expressed by me and other board members was of our discomfort and opposition to having to make serious decisions based on an interim draft preliminary report that was only provided to us at the meeting. It meant we were taking a hurried decision without being able to apply our minds. This was of particular concern to me because the board had been criticized in relation to the Pretty Low matter, including by the chair himself, for accepting a final internal audit report without an external forensic investigation. Despite our reservations, the chairperson and Mrs. Zulu insisted that action had to be taken against implicated employees immediately.
Why was that so urgent?
I can't answer that. A heated debate ensued and concerns were raised about the appropriateness of taking decisions which could be construed as interference into the Commission of Inquiry process because the AO transaction was on the Commission's list for investigation.
Can I again interrupt?
Yes.
Did the board know at the time that the two persons that were in fact provisionally suspended were due to testify that same day before the Commission?
We did know that Mr. Madavo was testifying the next day. A decision by the majority of the directors was for Mr. Fidelis Madavo, Executive Head Listed Investments, and Mr. Victor Siani, Assistant Portfolio Manager, Non-Consumer Goods, to be suspended on a precautionary basis. Disciplinary action had to be applied against the other implicated employees, including the acting CEO, Mrs. Matsepo More. The letters of suspension...
Question. So, action has been taken against the two people. Why have the others not been action taken on?
I did recommend that other employees, similar action should be taken against the other employees. I think we have to remember that we didn't want to take the action because we had not applied our minds to the meeting, but we were to the report. But it seemed as though we were being forced to take action. There was another member, Mr. Lebachang, his surname escapes me at this time, who signed the initial... Mulabatsi, who signed the initial subscription agreement with Dr. Majila, and I recommended that he be suspended as well, but my viewpoint was not accepted. The letters of suspension were once again compiled at the meeting by Mrs. Zulu without the assistance of the Executive Head of Human Resources, which was of concern because this action might once again be in contravention of the PIC Human Resources Policy and the Labour Relations Act. I will just say that at the meeting she did have a look at the Human Resources Policy quickly with regarding to precautionary suspensions. The head of HR was informed at 1:30 a.m. of the decisions taken by the board and was instructed to implement the precautionary suspensions and disciplinary processes. The media statement was also written at the same time by the same board member without the assistance of the head of corporate affairs. It appeared to me that Mrs. Zulu was fully prepared for the meeting and had read the draft internal report before the board meeting. At the end of the discussion, we were instructed to sign our copies and return them to the chairperson. Copies were eventually given to us with a watermark days after the meeting.
Before we finish this topic, can you please assist the Commission? It just seems to be inherently unfair that where the internal audit report the preliminary draft report recommends that action be taken against all those present at the meeting of the 20th of December 2017. Only 2 people provisionally suspended, and one of them the most junior person at the meeting. Was that debated? Was it discussed?
It was discussed, and we were aware that that Fidelis Madavo was out of the country at the time of the transaction. But the internal auditor expressed his view that Mr. Madavo was being evasive when was questioned about the transactions and whether the processes had been flouted. We did express our views, but as I said to you before, we were not heard. And also the view that he was appearing at the Commission of Inquiry the next day was of concern to me.
Yeah. So the question to follow up is that what about the others? Dr. Machila signed the subscription form. The acting CEO signed the checks. You know, what was the debate there?
I really don't know. It was recommended that everybody be treated the same, but the decision was to take disciplinary action against the acting CEO at that time. I cannot tell you the reasons why. I can't remember, but I'll have a look at my notes again and come back to the Commission if you're required. Okay.
Proceed.
Where was I? Okay.
8.8.
Yep. Update on employee relations. The reasons for the inclusion of the agenda item entitled Employee Relations were not clarified in a covering memorandum, which is according to standard practice at the PIC for presentations of documents requiring approval or noting. These issues related to the suspension and the status of the disciplinary proceedings of the company secretary, Mrs. Bongani Matabula, and the settlement agreement reached with Mrs. Menya, the previous executive head of IT. The chairperson and some members were insisting that the disciplinary proceedings against the company secretary, Mrs. Bongani Matabula, be lifted immediately, despite the advanced stage of the proceedings, and she be reinstated as the company secretary with immediate effect. The board members agreed to allow the disciplinary proceedings to continue because it was expected that they would be finalized within the next few weeks. Mrs. Zulu advocated that Mrs. Menya also be reinstated immediately in the position she held before the termination of her employment, despite the conclusion of the 7 million rand full and final settlement agreement, which was paid in 2018, and that Mrs. Menya had left the company's employ. Mrs. Zulu opined that the settlement agreement was a badly drafted document and berated the head of HR for the way management had handled the process.
When did you first become aware of the settlement agreement?
Last year. I'm not sure of the exact date, but we became aware of it last year after the disciplinary proceedings had been finalized with her. It was also a fact in the media. Where am I now?
8.9.5.
Okay, thank you. The board resolved to appoint an external legal expert to provide an opinion on the validity of the termination agreement with Mrs. Menya. This, I'd like to add, despite the presence of attorneys representing the PIC and Mrs. Menya during the disciplinary proceedings.
Was this legal opinion obtained, in fact?
I really can't say. I think they did approach legal companies for opinion, but I'm not sure whether it has been provided as yet.
Just to put it on record, Mr. Commissioner, during the disciplinary proceedings of the former secretary, the PIC was legally represented, and the employee was also legally represented. and the settlement agreement was signed between the parties and the legal representatives at the time. Yes.
It was Mrs. Menia.
Mrs. Menia.
Yeah.
Mrs. Menia.
In my capacity as the chairperson of the ICT-GC committee, I was vehemently opposed to the reinstatement of Mrs. Menia because I did not believe she was competent to head the IT department.
Sorry, can I just ask you a question on that? Given that your concern about her competence, had this in any way featured prior to the events around Mrs. Menia, so that you had dealt with your concerns in the organization, in the board, with Mrs. Menia directly?
Yes, I had. It was at various meetings. I wasn't the chairperson of the IT committee at that time, but she presented a lot of proposals and strategies to the committee, which quite frankly were very badly written documents and appeared to be copy and paste from certain sources. And I did request her on many occasions to edit the documents and provide us with properly written information.
Was that ever done and presented in a satisfactory manner?
One or two of them were done, yes. But, okay. Mrs. Menia had presented a 1 billion rand modernization plan for the IT systems of the PIC through the installation of the SAP system. The committee agreed the resolution to submit the plan to the board for approval, subject to certain conditions, one of the main ones being a breakdown of the costs, also the phases of the implementation of the process, and whether she had to prove whether the PIC really did require those systems. Such breakdown was never provided. Dr. Majila stopped the process because of his concern that Mrs. Menia's proposal could be part of a state capture scheme. I was of the same view. These HR matters clearly fell within the powers of management. However, it seemed that the chairperson and Mrs. Zulu wanted the board to overrule the decisions of management in relation to these two individuals. If I can also add that the budget for the IT systems, the computer software and hardware in 2017-2018 was 72 million rand. In 2018-2019 were 90 million rand, which included part of the 72 million rand that had not been spent the previous year. Also, just to add that the IT systems installed at the PIC with the software are internationally renowned systems for asset management companies, being Highport, Charles River, and they continually are upgraded. The IT systems, in my opinion, are fit for purpose for the PIC.
Mr. Commissioner, it's 11 o'clock. It's the normal tea time, but perhaps you can make a ruling that I can foresee that we will finish within the next half hour with this witness, and perhaps we can continue and have the tea later.
We suggest that you continue.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
The resignation by the board.
Yeah, just a question here. So you are saying this 1 billion rand program, plan, could be part of state capture. Are you meaning that people were planning to spend the money to bid for those contracts and make some? Can you just explain that, please?
Dr. Majila explained to me why he thought it was. How he thought it was. Apparently in other state-owned enterprises, and I cannot confirm this, that is what people do, is they buy expensive IT systems, and they have various people do benefit from the installation of these systems, even though the organization might not need it. Okay, number 9. Sorry. James Nogu serviced again under the pseudonym of James Noko, attacking various board members and management for impropriety and corruption, delving into their personal lives. At a board meeting on the 1st of February 2019, the board was informed by the chairperson that he had received a call from the finance minister. The finance minister was allegedly angry at the allegations contained in the mails and said the board should consider resigning, immediately failing which he will fire us and appoint an interim board within the next week. I emphasize that the chairperson was the only channel of communication with the finance minister, and we did not speak to him directly. This demand was highly irregular because the repercussions could be disastrous for the PIC. It could lose its phase license and was in contravention of the Companies Act for a company not to have a board. All 9 members of the board agreed to resign and issued a letter to the finance minister stating that we were prepared to continue as board members until the interim board had been appointed, which we believed was the following week. It was agreed that all committee and board meetings be cancelled forthwith.
Can I just ask you, it was testified by Mrs. Schlatzwayo that this letter of resignation was drafted at the board meeting by Mrs. Zulu?
Yes, it was.
Why did you think that a new board would be appointed the following week? Why did you think that?
We were told that the finance minister was ready to appoint a new board by Thursday the next week. Also, it was in the media that this might happen, which maybe we shouldn't have believed.
Can I just ask a question then? Did the board discuss its own viability and the ability and the legality of any decisions taken, given that in terms of the MOI you should have a minimum of 10 members and not 9? Was this a matter for discussion, and how did you deal with that?
No, we hadn't discussed it.
Do you not think that's really critical, in a sense that if you are, unless there's some means by which you meet your criteria of legality of the board, the effect on any decisions taken? And have you sought legal opinion, or are you going to seek legal opinion about the ability of the board as it is now, with 9 members, to continue to function effectively until a new board is appointed, given the question of quorum?
Yes, we are seeking legal opinion on that matter. Just to state that, further in my statement, after we agreed not to hold meetings, Mrs. Schlatzwayo wrote to the chairperson indicating that it was irregular and we could not be held responsible for and accountable for any decisions taken by the company while we were not actively involved. I'll come to that.
Well, does that not mean there actually is no board?
Subsequent to that, we received a letter from the chairperson stating that we must continue with our duties as boards, and we are continuing to have meetings, committee meetings, and represent the PIC as board members. And then we received a letter, as I said in my statement, on the 15th of February, wherein the finance minister accepted the resignations and requested we continue with our duties until an interim board had been appointed.
But of course, if I understand the position correctly, the 9 who resigned who are non-executive board members.
Yes.
Yes. So with the executive board members, the board is quorate.
There are 10 members of the board. There were 10 members of the board. We have had a subsequent resignation by a board member, Mrs. Lindiwe Toyi. I think it was last week.
And so how many are there now?
There's 8 non-executive directors and 1 executive member. There's 9. So we're not properly constituted.
I think that's, just the question would be, notwithstanding a letter from the Minister of Finance, that you continue functioning, the fact that you are not 10 anymore has to be material to the decision-making of the board, and I would think that your legal opinion on continued functioning should be quite urgently obtained and provided to the Commission?
I agree with you, yes, we will do that. I will request that it's done urgently. Has it been requested? Yeah. I'll do it again. I'll chili them up.
Just another question. Can board committees actually work if the main board is not correct?
The committees are co-rated because the policy is that you have to have more non-executive directors than executives, and we are co-rated at the time. The committee meetings and the board committees function optimally, and decisions are taken. Now, with us not being co-rated as a board, I'm not sure what the legality of the decisions is.
I suspect, just speaking off the top of my head now, that you should get legal advice on that as well. That should be included in the advice that you are seeking as a board.
Will do, yes. Okay. Do I have to read 9.10? Okay. Current board proceedings. Special board meetings have become the norm, often convened at short notice while documents were not provided timeously. The number of special board meetings, in my view, reflect a dysfunctional board which lurches from crisis to crisis. The divisions in the board became obvious when factions among members emerged with an environment of mistrust. It felt at times that we were blindsided and ambushed into making decisions that we were not comfortable with, particularly after lengthy, often disjointed discussions. As I said, the subcommittees of the board functioned well and resolutions were adopted without too much disagreement between the members, despite the dysfunctional board meetings. I just touched on the board remuneration because I thought it might be important for the committee to note. In 2017, SARS ruled that a non-executive director is regarded as an independent contractor and should register for VAT purposes if fees paid exceed 1 million rand per annum. The fees paid to the non-executive directors at PIC are inclusive of VAT, which were paid until June 2018. Since June 2018, the fees paid, there was a mistake, sorry. 2018. The fees paid to non-executive directors that are not VAT registered are paid 14% less than in previous years. Non-executive directors that are registered for VAT are paid the fees inclusive of VAT. The fees paid have reduced since June 2018, also when the VAT rate was increased to 15%. We have, because we were overpaid the VAT portion in June 2018 because I don't pay VAT, we've had to pay back the PIC that overpayment.
Yeah. Just a question, since we are here, can you just give us an indication about the board fees and all that, and how are they calculated?
These are the board fees before, with including VAT. Mm-hmm. For a board meeting, it's 19,542 rand per meeting. 19, yes, only 19, yes. Mm-hmm. The committee meetings are 11,167,000, approximately, and there is a retainer of 142,000 rand, conditional on us attending 4 board meetings per annum.
Yeah. And the main board, is that quarterly meetings?
It should be quarterly meetings, yes.
And the committee meetings?
Some of the investment committee meetings should take place once a month, mm-hmm. and other board meetings are also other committee meetings are on a quarterly basis as well, as required, yes.
Sort of your meetings where you serve, are they quarterly, are they meetings which are monthly? On your boards, your committees?
The investment committees, depending on the decisions that are required, they do occur monthly. The investment committees.
This is the only one where there's monthly meetings.
There's the investment committee and then the subcommittees under the investment committee, yeah.
Monthly meetings, those, yeah, because of the transactions.
If required, yes, if required, yes.
Okay, and the other meetings are just quarterly?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. But now we've had more special board meetings than we've had quarterly meetings.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Okay. Recommendations to the Commission. These are purely my views. The organizational structure of the PIC must be adapted as soon as possible to comply with the MOI, in accordance also with the the pension fund requirements for the reinstatement of the Chief Investment Officer role. Additional executive roles of Chief Risk Officer and Chief of IT should be considered when restructuring the PIC.
Can I just ask you there, when you're looking at the role of a Chief Risk Officer, do you recommend or have a view on whether the board committee should be audit and risk, or audit its own and risk its own, given all the things that have happened?
Yes, I have covered that in 12.7. I've recommended that they should be possibly split. I think the risk department of the PIC is vitally important in protecting the institution and the funds at its under management.
Question. If you have to do a decentralized structure, do you need the CIO role in a non-centralized structure?
Yes, you still do.
In what way?
At the holding company level, you would need a CEO
the holding company
to review all the transactions that are taken. And perhaps, but it's also depending on the cost effectiveness, is to have a CIO in each of the business units.
Yes.
Might be advisable.
Better, okay.
I think for what you call segregation of duties, I think it's very important.
And then chief risk is sort of within the departments or at the top?
A chief risk officer at holding level, but each business unit must have a head of risk as well, a complete independent person.
Okay.
The appointment of the chairperson of the board should be based on experience and expertise in the financial services industry, with the emphasis on asset management. They must have knowledge of the workings of a complex organization similar to that of the PIC. The board should be composed of a number of independent individuals with the requisite investment and commercial competence, which is vital, particularly when transactions are assessed for approval.
Have you seen the
PIC
bill that is busy doing the rounds in Parliament? Have you had access to it? The bill, which is
the bill before Parliament.
I am aware of it. I have seen it, but I haven't really read it thoroughly.
But this would be directly opposed to it. What you're suggesting here would be directly opposed to it.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
On that score, Mr. Commissioner, sorry, Mr. Letiga.
Yeah, just a question. Are there any benefits for the Deputy Minister of Finance to be the chairperson of the PIC board during your tenure? Like, sort of, have you seen any benefits for that?
Are you saying for himself or for the PIC? Benefits?
For the PIC. For the PIC. Well, we talk for the PIC.
Well, I think...
Are there any benefits for the PIC that the DM becomes the chairperson?
I don't think so. I think possibly to be a liaison between the PIC and the shareholder, which is represented by the finance minister, that possibly is beneficial. But I think the PIC should not be have political connotations to it because of the nature of the work that it does.
Can I just ask on the question following up on the bill before Parliament, was any board member or the board as a whole consulted regarding the provisions of this bill?
Not as I'm aware. The strategy to break up the PIC into a holding company with 4 or however many business units needs to be explored further in order to potentially reduce the risk of political interference and render efficiencies within the various processes. Board members, including executives and executive heads, should agree to undergo lifestyle audits regularly. I am prepared to submit myself to a lifestyle audit. Investment processes. The FIPS, the fund investment panel, should be the 2 fund investment panels, the private equity panel and the social economic investment panel, should be consolidated into one because in some instances there's an overlap of transactions. In some instances, we have found that where the private equity portfolio might not agree to funding it, it will go to the other panel. We're not aware that the investment appraisal reports are going to two different committees. The post-investment management process should be improved with employees having the requisite skill to monitor the performance of the investee companies. The team must be equipped to spot warning signs of potential financial distress for immediate remedial action to be implemented.
Is it your view at the moment that this post-investment management process is not adequate?
It's not adequate at this point in time. I think, and also it's current practice for the employees of the PIC to be appointed as non-executive directors on the boards of investee companies, which I think should be stopped. It's also potentially, I know that they do, it's like keeping an eye on what's happening in the companies, but in my experience, that you're only as good as the information that you are given, and potentially they don't have the required skills of a person that's had a number of years' experience of being a non-executive on various boards and know what to look for in case of problems. And I think the VBS issue should be an alert for the PIC to change their stance on that. The commercial banks view the PIC as the lender of last resort because they perceive that the PIC does not apply normal lending criteria to transactions. The PIC must consider mitigating the risks more effectively by taking tangible security and applying criteria where the lenders or investees provide their own capital.
Question?
And as I said, sorry.
Yeah, question. If the PIC becomes very stringent, like the banks and all that, I mean, wouldn't they constrain black economic empowerment? I mean, this is one argument which is normally put, huge requirements to put own capital and other things.
It would be. I think the PIC also has a transformational mandate and development mandate, and I do believe that they can mitigate the risks more effectively with putting in some more stringent security options. The PIC does take equity risk, but I think for the loans that there needs to be a lot more security taken. But obviously you have to consider the development, the BE transactions as they are presented. But in a lot of instances, the BE parties do have balance sheets, and we are requesting now that they do put in their own capital as well, because they need to have some skin on the bone.
Yeah. So you think that this can be done, sort of
Yes.
balancing them and making sure that the PIC still gets returns?
I believe it can be done, yes.
Can be done.
Yeah.
Okay.
As I said on 12.7, the Audit and Risk Committee should be reviewed and separated into two separate committees to gain better oversight of these very important functions. There were just two transactions that I wanted to highlight among a lot more in terms of the investment decision-making process where I felt uncomfortable at the time about the prudence of the investment. The one was... Okay. I'm not party to all the decisions, but mainly on the private equity portfolio where I sit. The one was Daybreak Farms, and it was done about 3 or 4 years ago. The initial transaction was approved. I was concerned about the exposure to the obligor because he was part of the consortium that had acquired shares in AFGRI. The investment in AFGRI was approved subject to the sale of the chicken section because of non-performance. I questioned why the PIC was willing to fund this transaction when it was in contradiction of a decision taken by the investment committee. The Daybreak Farms did go through some really big problems about 2 years ago, management issues as well and shareholder issues as well as the drought that affected. But I believe now that it is performing very well and it's making profits. So it's keeping its own. But the PIC had to take intervention, and Chairperson an executive chairperson was appointed to run Daybreak Farms. And just an aside, one of the executives said a long time afterwards that they were hoping the committee would decline the transaction in the Daybreak transaction, which was really highlighted a concern. I mean, it was said to me a long time afterwards, but it was of really concern to me.
So are you saying that the processes were breached there?
The processes weren't breached. I think there was pressure put on people to submit the application to the investment committee for approval.
Okay.
And possibly by the investees. I'm just surmising, I can't really say. The other one was VBS Bank. I was concerned about the risk of funding an institution focused on the unsecured market because I believed at the time the unsecured market was under extreme pressure with what was happening at African Bank and other similar institutions. And I was told that this is the development mandate of the PIC and this is where we should be focused. Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, this is the evidence of the witness. I don't know if there's any further questions by the Commission.
I've got about 3 questions. On the IT issues, the IT systems, since you are the chairperson there were leaks and security issues there. Do you maybe want to take us through the systems and how they were compromised, what happened, to give us a fuller picture, and also what has been done and what can be improved? By the way, this is within our terms of reference. So I'm taking advantage that you are here. Let's hear a better and a bigger story around that issue.
Can I answer that question first?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't tell you how the leaks happened. Mm-hmm. I do know that the executive head of IT, when she was there, Mrs. Menya, mm-hmm. gave Mr. Mayasela, who has subsequently left, he was the head of security. She gave him super access powers to the system, which meant that he had access to the whole of the PIC, including board documents and confidential documents. But I'm not sure how the other leaks happened. I can't tell you that, but I can, if you need the information, I can provide it to you at a later stage. What has been done, the cybersecurity, as I said, is a major threat to the PIC, to the organization, I think to every organization in the world. How can I say, professional hackers was employed by the PIC to see where the systems are vulnerable and to try and plug the holes. But as we know, technology is ever advancing, and the hackers are getting more and more sophisticated in the way that they are handling matters. But there's regular checking to see where the systems are being hacked and if they are being hacked. What has also been taken is that there are third-party companies, independent companies, that are providing services, security services to companies where they view your IT system all the time, 24/7, to see if there are any security breaches. And the PIC has appointed such a provider.
Okay. The second question, board skills, now and going forward. Could you maybe give us views about what kind of board skills the PIC needs, skills of the board people there? And are those skills there, or are there any gaps around those skills?
I think there are a number of gaps in the skills of the board at the moment. I think the board should be comprised, as I said, of investment people that have had experience in investments and in approving transactions in either a financial institution like a commercial bank or other similar asset management companies. And also it's vital that we do have members of the board that have got commercial expertise, that have been board members, executive members, and non-executive members that have previous experience of being on the board. Governance procedures also, they need to be compliant. They need to be, what I'm trying to say, they need to be experienced in compliance and governance of board and good governance behavior of a board.
To add, so you are saying that within credit, like sort of the lending side, that you should have like serious skills like a typical bank would have? Yeah, is that what you're saying?
As what I'm saying is that they need experienced credit professionals, people that have worked in banks, because their security checks are rigorous, having come from that background. We were always fighting with credit to get transactions approved. And I think that they need those type of skills of people with good credit experience in commercial institutions, and perhaps maybe not on a contract basis if they are perhaps a little bit older than what is required, also to transfer their skills to people in the department.
Yes, and on the transactions side, there's quite some complex transactions and derivatives and everything. Are you saying that you need some strong investment bankers from, say, commercial banks and all that, the investment banks?
I have found that the investment teams within the PIC, the people are well equipped. There are a number of investment people that have had experience outside of the PIC, and the reports are very comprehensive, and they are very well done. They are very professional in what they do. They're very bright, and I think a lot of them are intelligent and intellectually equipped to handle the transactions. The reports are being very comprehensive. I've seen how they've improved over the time, and they are thoroughly investigated. But as I always say, you're only as good as the information you've got today. Who knows what's going to happen further down the line? You can try and mitigate all the risks and try and forecast what's going to happen, but we never know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Sorry, just in your response there, if I could, I think there's a in the question I interpreted it slightly differently, as to draw a distinction between the employees of the PIC and the skills the board requires.
Yes.
And I think that the last part of what you're saying was very much from the employees.
Yes.
So that there is a competence, what you're saying, confirming is that there's a high rate of competence within the PIC and its employees, but the skills that need to match that and be present in the board are what you have also outlined, so that you have a commensurate skill capacity in the board.
There is a very good skill base within the PIC at the moment. There are some gaps within the risk department and the legal department, but I do believe that the investment professionals are sufficiently equipped to review transactions, assess and analyze them, judging by the reports that I have received. But at board level, it's not the same level of competency.
Yeah, and then you mentioned that the skills that say coronation, old mutuals, they are wanted within the board or within the company. In which way?
I think potentially on the board.
Yeah.
It would be good to have people with those skills on the board.
Okay, for for book bills and IPOs and all that, is that?
No, just I think from assessing the transactions and also reviewing investment decisions and being, can I say, part of the investment decision-making process.
Yes, yeah.
And oversight as well. Yes,
the oversight, yeah. The final question from me: do you think that unions should have board seats on the PIC?
I don't think so, but I do believe that they are asking for that. And I believe that if they can add value, it wouldn't be wrong to have them on the board as well. Maybe that will stop them from thinking negatively and give them some insight into what's actually happening at the PIC.
The final one. During your time at the PIC, have you seen any political pressure being put on the board, the company or the board?
To do transactions?
Yeah, for transactions, for anything.
I haven't
Intense political
I haven't
pressure.
seen that in transactions. I wasn't aware of any political pressure on the transactions except with the pretty low investigation, what came out of the Budlender report. I'm not aware. Obviously, you do sometimes, think in your mind that there might be political pressure, but I don't have any proof of that.
Perhaps just one question is, as a board member, given the delegation of authorities and the information coming out, are you satisfied with the information flow to the board about investment decisions, and not just from the investment committee, but in general, and that the delegation of authority is appropriate? In looking at the delegation of authority, it's what is referred or required for board approval is very limited. So is there a question that delegation of authority needs to be relooked at? Obviously, it is going to be reassessed given the GPF 2 billion limit that now prevails until the delegations have been reviewed. But in hindsight, looking at all the issues that have been raised, what would you say about the delegation of authority by the board and what needs to come to the board?
I do believe that it needs to be overhauled, and perhaps, as you said, it is limiting in some instances. But the mandates particularly in the listed investment space, needs to be reviewed, and the board needs to also have some oversight of what's happened on the listed investment transactions. As I said, the AO transaction was within the mandate and the delegation of authority, and look what happened. And the board I only became aware of it from media reports. So I think that definitely needs to be overhauled. And if it's limiting, maybe it's not such a bad thing. And I think it should be also in line with the mandates of the clients, being the Government Pension Fund, the UIF, and the Compensation Commission.
If one had to say that all transactions of the PIC need to go to the board for noting, even if they are below the thresholds, would that work?
No, I think that would be very onerous on the board. The investment committee does report to the board on the valuations. The investment committee does get the valuations, I think, on an annual basis of all the investments that are done in the PIC. The investment committees do get the information regarding the performance of the investee companies on a quarterly basis. And I think that's sufficient. Where the board should be aware of is where perhaps there's investments that need action taken or are not performing adequately and could be in financial distress. Perhaps the board should be aware of that. But I think at the investment committee level, it is adequate that they have the oversight of all the investments that have been done. Because they are board members anyway.
Yeah.
Isn't the IO transaction a perfect example of where the matter should have been elevated to the board? Where there was an audit query raised, it was reported to the Audit and Risk Committee, it was elevated to the Investment Committee, but it never reached the board.
It did. Well, the board was informed of it, but the Investment Committee made the decisions about the action to be taken on that transaction.
But I suppose the board, whatever information it would get with regard to transactions, wouldn't know whether a process or somewhere during the processes there was a miss. There was something that was amiss. You wouldn't know that offhand, would you?
No, you wouldn't know that because you assume that when the transaction comes for appraisal or for approval, that all the due processes have been followed. And you have to trust, and which sometimes is not easy to do, that the internal processes within the executives and the management has been followed to the book. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. That's the business for the day.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much for availing yourself to come to testify before us. We are much richer now in knowledge as to how things were happening within the PIC because of your evidence and the evidence of Ms. Hlajwayo and others as well. Thank you so much. I'm sure your being here will encourage others who would love to come and give evidence before us.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's it.
Shall we then adjourn till Monday, 10 o'clock, Mr. Commissioner?
Yes, we shall adjourn now until Monday. What's the date on Monday? 4th. 4th of March at 10 o'clock. Have you got any idea how many witnesses you have for that day? On Monday?
Mr. Commissioner, at the moment, the plan is to have about 5 witnesses ready for next week. The identity will not be disclosed, as previously discussed.
Yes, thank you. We will then adjourn until Monday at 10 o'clock.